Welcome to the Sportlight podcast for parents, coaches, and athletes. The Sportlight refers to the time in an athlete's life when they have increased ability to affect the culture around them and the increased opportunity to learn life's lessons through sports. This podcast aims to help parents and coaches capitalize on their athletes' precious time in the Sportlight. The Sportlight podcast is brought to you by Especially for Athletes program.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Especially for Athletes, the Sportlight podcast. My name's Dustin Smith. I'm here with Shad Martin and our guest Sheldon Martin, who if you're watching us on your computer, you can see the striking resemblance between Sheldon and Shad. They're brothers. Sheldon is a doctor of behavioral health, an expert in mental health and wellness, and we're excited to have him here today. So we're going to jump right into some questions and let Dr. Martin educate us. Shad, go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us, Sheldon. You came to one of our first events, and you talked about something that has resonated with a lot of our athletes and with us ever since, a concept called the reaction range, a psychological term that you took and applied to sports. I thought it would be interesting for everyone just to hear that concept and then to talk about how it might apply to sports a little bit. Would you explain it to us a little?
Yeah, you bet. So reaction range is a theory that when you put in all of your energy, all of your effort, all of your work, there are still going to be hard limits within certain categories, right? So regardless of how much I lift weights, there's going to be a peak where I physically won't be able to push beyond that point. And the reaction range for us as human beings, there are more categories than we often consider, but we all have them. So I could play in practice basketball as much as I want. I probably won't ever hit the ability of LeBron James, even if he did not practice, right? And so that kind of element of our reaction range, how do we hit our peak in these categories and push to it? So that's kind of the concept of reaction range.
Yeah, and we talk about a concept we've talked before about on our podcast about we teach our athletes seek to be your best, not the best. That's a healthier way to approach it. And that was the subject you were speaking about when you talked about with our athletes about this reaction range. I'm wondering in your mind, what are some of the, like hearing that concept is one thing, right? Like I have a ceiling, LeBron James has another ceiling. But what are some of the applications of that concept for coaches, for parents, for athletes that could help them as they try to get the most out of sports in their life?
Well, great. I would say to the athlete, they should always seek to be their best rather than trying to focus on being the best, and in every area of their life. The reason that's important, sometimes athletes can feel like, oh, you're just trying to like pat me on the back and participation trophy type thing. And that's not the concept, is that in every area of life, you'll get the most fulfillment if you are pushing yourself to the peak of your reaction range. For parents, here's what I would do. In sports, often biggest, strongest, fastest is the easiest to see. But we all know examples where individuals, they're not the biggest, strongest, fastest, yet they're among the greatest athletes who've ever played. An example would be Tom Brady, right? His combine didn't turn any heads. He's one of the greatest football players that ever played, right? What was the difference? What were the areas where he is at a peak that make him such a great athlete that are more difficult to see? As parents, I would look for those and I would point them out. Did they encourage another player? Are they a great leader? Did they continue to give maximum effort even though their team was trailing? Those things are often the items that get overlooked the easiest because it's easier to see biggest, strongest, and fastest. To coaches, I would give the same and type of similar advice. You have athletes on your team that they are exceptional in areas that if you don't look for, you're not going to see. And again, this is not just to make the athletes feel good. This will make your team better. So the best leader on your team may not be the best athlete. So what do you do to leverage that? The athlete who gives the most effort That may not mean that it increases playing time, but do you validate that openly in front of the team at the end of a practice to bring the team further along? So great coaches, in my experience, they are the ones that look for these areas, they see them, and then they highlight them because they know it makes everyone better. But it's easier to ignore them. So I would say to coaches and parents, you've really got to look with the belief that this is going to make all involved better. So that's one piece of advice that I would give.
Yeah, I think it's a great concept to think of those underappreciated values that are really, really important. So Dustin here, we both have known Dustin a long time, owner of QB Elite. Like when you look at a Tom Brady versus, some of these uber athletic guys, what is it? Like, where is he so high in his reaction range that makes someone like him great?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about Tom Brady, Sheldon. I actually was just talking with some coaches about him the other day, and in particular, how he's still able to play at his age. And because of the lack of athleticism, you'd think by now he would have suffered a back injury or some sort of, he's 44 or whatever. And he's he should have been hit enough now that he's out of the league, like most guys are by the time they're 30. But what he does so well with a limited amount of athleticism, not that he's not a good athlete, but he's not the elite level athlete that a lot of these top level quarterbacks are. He gets rid of the ball so fast. His decision-making is so quick. He has a plan before he snaps the ball, and he knows how to execute it. So he's on time with everything. And those are the kind of things that's enabled him to not take hits, to not throw interceptions, to be able to stay on the field and win games. And so that's where he, to your point, his area of expertise is so elite at that level that maybe he can get away with not being the fastest or not being the strongest because he can get rid of the ball quicker than others, where the other person who maybe has the greatest arm in the world as a quarterback doesn't see defenses well enough and doesn't know when to throw the ball. And so they hold on to it and they get sacked and they're out of the league in a couple of years, or they're hurt in a couple of years or something. And so it's interesting to think about that as we're looking at athletes, whether they're ones that we're coaching or our own kids, is that maybe it's to stop trying to turn them into Tom Brady if they're not Tom Brady. Maybe they're a different style. They're different. I know with my QBs, I'll look at them throw, and some guys have a different throwing motion. They all want to throw like a Tom Brady, or they all want to throw like a Patrick Mahomes or an Aaron Rodgers, but not all of them have that type of throwing motion. So you work with what you have and get you to be really good at what you are, instead of trying to turn you into something that you're not. And I assume in your world, it's the same thing with how we raise kids, right? That understand what we have and work with what we have and accentuate the positives in those areas.
Absolutely. In fact, it reminds me of that quote. A lot of business leaders have used it, where we say, stop trying to teach eagles to swim and otters to fly, right? The athletes on your team and your children, they're going to have some natural gifts that they might not even see that they're natural, because in my experience, what happens is they overlook them quickly because it comes so naturally to them. You've mentioned a great one, decision-making. I think some are just able to make a great decision in a short period of time, and it just comes naturally to them. And so I think our parents and coaches able to spot that some will be able to do this, and are we highlighting that in a way that makes them a better athlete and makes their life more fulfilling? Or are we taking kind of a lazy approach of just lining all the athletes up and seeing who's the fastest, right? So I think it takes extra work, but it'll make everyone improved.
So I have a question on that. Shad and I, in a past episode that we did, and we actually talk about it in probably several episodes, we talk about being intentional. That and it kind of ties in with our phrase of eyes up, do the work, especially with the do the work portion. That I tell athletes all the time, you can do a lot of work, but if it's stupid work, it's a waste of time, right? You need to do smart work and good work. And so in being intentional in how we do it, how as a parent, are we more intentional in recognizing these attributes or gifts that our kid may have, and not accidentally look over them because we don't know better? Like what are some tips to some parents to be more intentional in finding that?
Well, yeah, and you've mentioned on previous podcasts that I've loved this concept of look for effort before you're looking for outcome. That's key, right? And so watch your athlete, watch your child. If you see them starting to dog it a little bit at a moment when they should be giving their best effort, give feedback on that. Look for that before you look if they scored the game-winning touchdown, if they had the game-winning RBI. Because those are the characteristics and elements that are going to give them the most success. So that's the first thing I would do, is look at their competition differently. The second thing I would do is really try to be creative. And what I mean by that is look for the moments outside of the play, right? What is their interaction with others on the team? How did they respond when something did not go well in the game? Watch the moments that are outside of the play. And I think in those moments, that phrase, right, the cream rises to the crop, you're going to see attributes that they're naturally gifted at be highlighted in that moment. I think we've all seen great athletes who, when the going gets tough for the team, there are a few that just have the ability to bring everyone along. And it comes naturally to them. I would look for those opportunities outside of the competition because it's going to be very easy to focus on, as we've said, biggest, strongest, fastest, because it draws your attention to the most exciting part. And as you've mentioned, Dustin, Tom Brady, what makes him amazing is really what happens outside of the ball being snapped or before the pass is thrown. And unless you're attuned to that, you'll never see it. You only see the pass and completion.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what you have to intentionally look for as a parent.
It's interesting that you say that too, because just this week, I've had 4 or 5 discussions with Division I football coaches, and also with an NFL MVP football player just in the last week. And in case of, and all of these, the NFL MVP several years ago, we were talking specifically about what makes quarterbacks elite and the differences between the very, very best, the really good, and then the average. But with the Division I football coaches, we're asking me about players, specifically about players. And every single person we were talking about, they're all really good players. And it's real. I mean, we wouldn't even be having the discussion if that young man wasn't already fast and a certain size. Like they do have to have some certain, measurables that these coaches are looking at. But now they're looking for what separates them. And the reason I'm bringing this up is for any parents that are listening, I want them to make sure they understand that even if you do have that 6'4", 250-pound son who runs like a deer and can, has a 40-inch vertical, one of the questions that comes up, and I've had this, as I mentioned, with these coaches, is they do ask things like, to your point, what kind of team guy are they? How are they? I had a Major League Baseball scout say that he likes to show up early to games and to see how his exact words was, I want to see his butt get off the bus. I want to see if he's a hat on backwards, walking around acting like he's the coolest thing in the world, not talking to anybody guy, or is he a guy that gets off and I can see interact with his teammates? And is he the kind of kid that, that you can tell is a dude on the team? He's a guy, he's a focal point. And a lot of these kids, I don't think their parents, they simply see the numbers and the athleticism and don't understand that if you're a kid on the sideline who's throwing your hands up or who's complaining or who's, your lack of effort at the end of a game isn't there when you're losing, you can see those kids that kind of start dogging it and they go stand by themselves over on the side, little body language, things like that those will quickly kill those positive, attributes that the kid had of being so fast and so strong. And I assume it's the same way in business, right? And in life, we've got to make sure that our kids understand the full picture.
It's funny you say that, and Sheldon has known me almost my whole life. But one of the most impressive things I did when I was offered my my scholarship, this goes to what you're saying, my to play baseball, I struck out. And the coach who was there to recruit me was sitting there by my dad. And he actually said to my dad, I want to see if he puts on the act. And my dad was like, and I wasn't someone who like put on the act a lot, you know, so, but I just went back and put the bat in the thing and took off my helmet, put on my hat and started to, you know, to cheer for my next teammate. It was a bad call. I'll still say it to this day. It was a bad call.
Of course it was.
But you know, they look for those things, right?
That's like, a great way. The act is a great way.
He said, let's see if he puts on the act. I want to see that. And so what you're saying right now, like that was, and I didn't. And that's when he was like, all right, I want to work with this kid. And I wasn't this 6'4" run like a deer. I had to bring some intangibles and things. And so he really looked for that. And awesome. Hey, Sheldon, can we switch gears a little bit? As you know, our motto, and especially for athletes, is eyes up, do the work. And with your, you know, clinical eyes, we consult with you a lot about trying to help our athletes, help those with struggles with mental health, with depression, you know, to look out and try to help with some of those like suicide and suicide ideation statistics that are going on. And we consult you a lot on how to best do that. But for our listeners, with the eyes up, do the work, eyes up, looking for kids who might be struggling, and do the work, helping them. To us, that creates a question, you know, as our athletes with the Sportlight really try to do this and it gets into their heart. Two questions. One, what should we be looking for as coaches, as parents? When should we be concerned about these things? Depression, anxiety, like what are some signs that we could really look for as we have our eyes up? What should we be looking for? What should we be trying to see if we want to make a difference in this area? And then the second is, okay, I see it. What do I do? You know, how do I, as a coach, as a parent, like what are some of the simple things that I could do to help someone who might be struggling?
Good question. The first things I would look for is if there is a dramatic change in something that is out of character. Now, sometimes what can be tricky is that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a downward dip. It may be an upward spike. So if you have a friend that starts trying to give away things or is overly trying to be extremely positive or connect, almost it feels uncomfortable because maybe they're a sense of they're considering doing something harmful to themselves. And so many times individuals in that stage will reach out to kind of make some final connections. That would be a clear red flag. The downward dip is also something, if they are withdrawn, ongoing withdrawing from what they normally do, I would be concerned. If their character changes where their anger is explosive when it normally isn't. So any of those major spikes or downward dips, here's what you could do. And you don't have to be a professional to do this, because what you do is, I want you to remember three words. You ask, you care, and you tell. So ask is simple because it is very helpful. In fact, it's kind of a myth that we try to get rid of. It does not increase mental illness or suicidal ideation to directly ask someone. It is perfectly appropriate to say, hey, are you okay? Or, hey man, are you gonna hurt yourself? Like, I just want to ask you. I've been really concerned. Because best case, they say, no, man, why you say, no, I'm worried about a test, right? That's an okay answer. But they might, most of the time, they're going to share more honestly with you. Regardless of what they say, care or mean, take serious what they say. If they start to kind of share a few things that are difficult for them, then you have an obligation to tell. Tell someone who can do something about it. This doesn't mean gossip. It doesn't mean, hey, I'm going to tell the team. Hey, I'm just going to tell lots of people. You tell someone that can do something about it. It might go like this. You go to your principal. You go to the school counselor. You say, hey, John, I asked him if he's going to hurt, like if anything's wrong. He said it is. He's not doing okay. And I don't know can you help me? That is a perfect response from an athlete. Parents, tell someone who can do something about it. Call a mental health professional. Call a crisis hotline. Connect with those that understand the resources on how to best help. So I would look for an upward spike or a downward dip, and then I would ask, I would care, and I would tell.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Sheldon?
Yeah.
We have people who listen to these episodes where, outside of these episodes, primarily we're addressing kids, teenagers. I think these episodes we're doing with this podcast are going to grab the attention more of adults and parents, which I think is great. So if you're a parent, a coach listening to this, thank you. But we talk still a lot about the kids, but I have a question for you as it relates to the adults. If we have an adult listening to this podcast right now, what are some things that we should be looking for to maybe in looking in the mirror at ourselves to maybe realize that maybe we have some mental health issues that we need to ask and get addressed? What are some things we can maybe identify in our own life that, because I know, for example, me, I would never think that these would be, most guys, I think in general, in particular, we don't want to admit that, maybe we're struggling or hurting with something and we want to hide it. And I'm sure women are the same way. What are things we need to do to be honest with ourselves and maybe go talk to somebody or get help? What are some signs we should look for?
Well, some of the signs I would look for, a word that I like to use is the word managed, and meaning, does this, what I'm feeling, does it feel unmanageable to me? I don't feel like myself. I have a hard time getting up and getting going. I have a hard time controlling. This is out of the realm of what I normally feel. At any level, if you feel that, I would talk to someone. I really would. There is a stigma surrounding mental health that we are making great strides to improve. But we still need to improve. We're learning, especially with athletes. I'll be honest, because many times the thoughts of the past were, I'll just work harder. I'll just work out of this. It's my resilience. That's what's going to do it. And then you take someone who has a great GPA, they're good looking, they're athletic, they're strong, and all of a sudden they have a dip and it doesn't fit the narrative that we've been telling ourselves. And so we're getting better at being able to talk about this. My hope is that you would feel as comfortable talking about this with a healthcare provider as you would about having a mole removed or my elbow hurts. Say, I just don't feel the same way. They know how to do the right testing and ask the right questions and get you the proper support. But in the name of, I'm just going to push through, is not fair to yourself. We don't do that with any other healthcare organization. We don't tell athletes with an injured knee, just toughen up. Sometimes you have to have the ACL replaced. It is the same with mental health. If you're not well, if you're not feeling right, then reach out for help.
Sheldon, thank you for that, because that is something we all see it. And I love how you said it. It might be a particular, sometimes athletes feel like they have this image to uphold of being stronger than everything. And this is not something they can do alone. I have the benefit, and Dustin has the benefit of coming to you often when we have someone in our life who needs help. And we know you have great resources. I mean, just like doctors, not all mental health professionals are created exactly the same. And, maybe in the notes of our podcast, we can include some of those that even give some resources for people to reach out to, and that will do a really good job that they can have confidence in as we recommend them. If a parent is listening to this for themselves or for one of their kids, this is something so serious. We care so deeply about it. We don't want kids just running around feeling like they have to, figuratively speaking, play on a broken a broken leg without getting help. And it's just so sad sometimes that this is a real medical issue, but some just feel like it's weakness to have a sickness of mind, that it's not a sickness of mind, it's weakness of character. And that is, let's say someone's listening to this who's still convinced that is the case. I know you've had extensive training. What would you say to the person who is still sitting here like, nah, I should just fight through this. This is just a weakness, and it's not a real sickness. What would you say to that person?
Well, now you're asking me to kick into the therapist mode, and I would sit back and say, how's that working out for you? Right? Sometimes, I'm just gonna push through. How's that approach been useful for you in the past? If we're real honest with ourselves, usually we realize it doesn't work well. And I would say too, Shad and Dustin, is I hope the coaches and the parents and everyone know it's a pretty cool space to be on the other side and to see the value of someone who's dealing with something in their life that is difficult, that what athletics brings to their life. I meet with a lot of teenagers that practice is the escape from a difficult life at home or a tragedy. That their coach becomes the one parent figure that they look to as a role model. I hope, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. The NFL is doing a big thing on it this month with their players who are speaking out about their own experience. I think as a community and that it's a wonderful thing if we recognize that our influence in this world is a lot more than wins, and that we can have an impact on a human life in a way that maybe athletics is just a venue to really help someone find value, fulfillment, learn hard work, role models. So I just, from the other end of a mental health professional, I would just say thank you to coaches in that, because the impact they have is often even greater than anyone else in that athlete's life can do for mental health or mental illness.
Yeah. It's a good way to end right there. Parents, thank your coaches, be grateful for them. We need more adults helping. And as adults, we need to talk to each other and be aware of each other and not be ashamed to say that we may need a little bit of help. That's, I think those are some of the takeaways that as we leave and move on after we end this, let's all be a little better at that, be more aware of each other.
Thank you, Sheldon.
You bet.
Thanks, Sheldon.
Anytime. Yep.
Eyes up, do the work.
This has been the Sportlight podcast from Especially for Athletes, sponsored by Coca-Cola. You can learn more about Especially for Athletes by visiting the website at especiallyforathletes.org. You can also learn more about the book, The Sportlight, by Shad Martin and Dustin Smith at especiallyforathletes.org/book.